Fellowship of the Broken, Making Sense of 12-Step Recovery by Angelo. Chapter 10, Being Human. As far as metaphors go, this one brings us as close to home as it's possible to be. The etymology of the term Homo sapiens is fascinating. Both words are Latin in origin, with homo meaning human being, and sapien meaning wise, sensible or judicious. The implication is that human beings are wise, or at least that we have the capacity for wisdom. This begs the question as to where this wisdom comes from. The answer is in the term human being itself. The use of the two words clearly indicates two aspects of humanity. The word human refers to our physical existence in the form of a body and personal ego-mind. The word being refers to our sense of existence, which is non-physical and manifests as the certain knowledge that I am. We assume that this knowledge or wisdom arises in the personal ego-mind, but this assumption is incorrect. This sense of being arises in the realm of knowingness rather than knowing. It is the original thought, and its origins are at the very heart of consciousness. When my own journey of recovery started, I obviously knew that I was a human being, but my understanding and assumption was that this meant that I was just human. My identity was 100% human, and didn't even realize that there could be more to life, let alone be open to the simple idea of being. I knew that I had a big problem with addiction, and I was looking for a human solution to the problem. This exclusive identification with the personal identity as a human is the dominant paradigm in society, and hence I felt completely justified in my belief. I was understandably resistant to any suggestions that challenged this belief, however well-meaning they may have been. My struggles continued, and eventually I was broken enough to become willing to entertain new ideas. I had thought that I was a wise person, but it soon became clear that this reliance on my self-conceived personal wisdom was my biggest problem. It takes humility to admit our brokenness and lack of wisdom, and it was not something that I would have chosen for my personal self. However, this enforced humility turned out to be the key to unlocking the door to my self-imposed nightmare. Since then, the journey of no distance has been all about reducing the influence of the personal human self in favour of consciousness or being. This change in the internal balance of power between human and being is the essence of spiritual growth. It will be ongoing until my body and personal ego-mind come to an end. And it's not a smooth changeover, but is instead characterized by ebbing and flowing, forward movements and setback, hope and doubt, and feelings of progress, followed by familiar feelings of failure. Gradually, through practice, the balance continues to shift, and eventually true wisdom begins to emerge. If we keep going, then such impersonal wisdom is inevitable, because consciousness is our true nature. And this wisdom is not personal. It arises in the absence of the person. Not for me to personally claim this wisdom. All I can do is share it. The human and the being are two aspects of our integrated existence. The human is the body and personal ego-mind. The being is ultimately consciousness itself. These two descriptions imply just two states, but in reality it's more of a spectrum of identity. If we assign the purely human aspect as number 100 and give pure consciousness the number 0, then we have a conceptual range of 100 to 0 that covers all possibilities. As mentioned above, my understanding at the outset was 100% human, so on our range this would be represented as 100-0. As our understanding develops, then the balance changes, say, to 90-10. Life is still very personal, but we begin to comprehend that there is something more. Further contemplation, other spiritual practices and understanding move the balance to 80-20, then 70-30, and on to 60-40. The balance is still predominantly personal, but now the influence of consciousness is tangible. Eventually we reach the position of 51-49. The next stage brings up fear, resistance and doubt, because if we go any further, then it feels like we are giving up our personal right to self-determination. The survival instinct kicks in, and the personal ego mind naturally resists its own demise. It seems impossible to go any further until it becomes apparent that the fear, resistance and doubt are only arising in the personal ego mind. We see that awareness is aware of this, and that knowingness knows that there's nothing to be afraid of. Eventually we cross the invisible line to 50-50, and then our progress begins to feel easier. The balance changes further to 40-60, then 30-70, and even 20-80. Some reach a stage of 10-90, and a few rare examples go even further than that. Attainment of 0-100 on a permanent basis seems implausible, because it would imply complete absence of bodily identity and a cessation of all personal survival instincts. This illustrative gradual progression through the spectrum is intentionally simple in order to provide a framework for deeper understanding. What actually happens is that we move around within the spectrum on a perpetual basis. The attributes of the purely human 100-0 are fear, selfishness, separation and all of the negative destructive aspects of humanity. The features of consciousness at 0-100 are love, selflessness, unity, and all of the positive spiritual aspects. All of this is present in every human being at all times, but the individual expression will depend entirely on where we are in any given moment on the spectrum of balance. What is really important to understand here is that spiritual growth is not about striving to become a better person. The whole idea is to let go of the conditioned and habitual attachment to personhood. The person does not change, but rather the person begins to fade. What emerges in its place are the inherent qualities of the being, which were always present but obscured by the personal ego mind. It would be nice to think that we could work towards 50-50, cross over the line to 49-51 and live happily ever after. This goal overlooks the powerful magnetic pull of the material world and the strength of our personal conditioning. We need to practice to make progress, and continue to practice to maintain and enhance our progress. If we let up, then the balance will simply return to where it started. Any amount of progress will be reversed if we stop moving forwards. And this understanding is crucial. It would also be nice to think that our balance could be maintained throughout any given day. If we start the day at, say, 40-60, then it would seem reasonable to expect that our experience will reflect this balance at all times. This overlooks the simple fact that life is lived from moment to moment. Days are just artificial, convenient constructs of time, which in itself is in the mind of the personal ego self. There is only ever this moment, and our experience of life will be the direct result of where we are on the spectrum of balance between human and being in any given moment. We may be at, say, 30-70, but suddenly find ourselves at 80-20 in the blink of an eye, depending on specific triggers in everyday life. The balance is constantly on the move, and we will experience the results. Consistent awareness of our own thinking and behaviour is the key to recognizing what has happened. The more we let go of our human nature and embrace the nature of being, the more we will naturally abide in the happiness, peace, love and unity of consciousness. This framework of being human helps to explain the many and various spiritual experiences that have been reported and documented throughout history. If we accept that our position on the spectrum of balance can move from moment to moment, then sudden changes are possible, as well as gradual changes. Dramatic spiritual awakenings are not common, but they do happen. I've witnessed them on several occasions and have had an experience myself that I will explore later. A momentary spiritual awakening can be seen simply as a sudden shift in the balance to, say, 10-90. Suddenly, everything becomes clear and bright. This is typically immediately followed by a sharp reaction in the other direction to, say, 90-10. This reaction is triggered by fear because the 10-90 experience is so alien and unfamiliar. What can then happen is that the person claims for himself or herself that they have had a spiritual experience. The experience is now perceived from the position of 90-10, and the person naturally assumes that the experience was personal. But ironically, it's the sudden momentary absence of the person that creates such an experience. The person then immediately believes that it was personal. What has actually happened is that a brief glimpse or taste of consciousness has been experienced by consciousness. It's often the case that a person having had such an experience will chase a repeat performance for many years before realizing that a person can never have such an awakening, because it was not and never can be a personal experience. And I know this to be true because it's happened to me. A better and more relevant example is Bill Wilson, who was one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. He documented his spiritual experience, and it was so impactful that it inspired him to spend the rest of his life trying to help others to do likewise. In doing so, he continued to struggle because the experience did not establish him permanently in a state of being. And he also had a personal view of what had happened to him, which he equated to his particular faith at the time. His human traits persisted, as they do in all of us to a greater or lesser extent. His prominence as a co-founder of AA undoubtedly made it more difficult to fully let go of personhood, despite his best efforts to keep a low profile. As far as I know, he never did recapture that spiritual experience, despite trying many different ways to do so, and the same is true for me. So Homo sapiens are, by definition, wise humans. This wisdom arises from consciousness and not from the individual or collective mind of humanity. As human beings, we have the capacity to influence where we are on the spectrum of balance between human and being. First, we have to recognize this for ourselves, and then we need to take action to grow towards 0-100, knowing of course that we will never attain this mark of perfection. All we can do is make progress, moment by moment, accepting always that such progress is never smooth. The familiar metaphor of the carrot and stick can help us understand why such progress is desirable. A cart driver in times gone by would induce desired behaviour in the horse by either dangling a carrot in front of its nose or smacking it on its rear with a stick. Both methods produce the same result, but the combination could be varied depending on the nature of the horse. And spiritual growth is analogous to the carrot and stick. The carrot is relief from the natural tension and discontent of the personal ego mind. The prizes on offer are happiness, peace, love, and unity, all of which arise from abiding in and as consciousness. The stick is our suffering, which manifests in innumerable ways and is an inevitable consequence of living life only as a human and ignoring the true reality and wisdom of being. The carrot and the stick indicate that we have a choice. We can respond to either of them, or we can stay where we are. Each of us has this choice, and it's not for me or anyone else to make this choice on behalf of anyone but myself. It takes humility to accept that our own state of identity is the cause of all of our problems. And it also takes courage for me to say this, because I'm aware that there may be many who strongly disagree. I accept that everyone has their own personal experiences and are fully entitled to hold personal opinions. What I am saying is that personal opinions are not wisdom. Opinions are just personal. Wisdom is universal. A good example of this wisdom comes from Sri Muji, who is a contemporary spiritual master, and he simply states, quote, "All problems are personal. No person, no problem." Close quote. This concise statement identifies the root of the problem and clearly points to the solution. If we do want to solve our problems, then we need to move our identity in the direction of consciousness or being. There have been many wise men and women throughout the ages who have tried to communicate this simple idea in a huge variety of ways. One such individual was William Shakespeare, whose work is infused with spiritual wisdom. The opening lines to Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1, say it all. Quote, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache, and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to." Close quote. Now Shakespeare is highlighting the choice between being on the one hand and the personal ego mind on the other. to continue to suffer the vagaries of life, the heartache and the countless problems of the 100-0 human existence, or to sleep no more, to wake up to our true being and to die to our personal selves. We are human beings. The balance of power that we give to these two elements of existence will directly affect our experience of life. We get to choose. The element that has the priority and comes first in each moment will win the day. The choice is simply between human being and being human.